Welcome to Private Lesson Soundbites. I'm Genna, and I'm in New York City with composer Daron Hagen. And it's so good to see you, Darren.
It's nice to see you, my friend.
Thank you. We've been friends for a long time. I think we go back 1 millennium.
Yes.
For sure.
Autumn of 1981. Yes.
Yeah, we were both students at Curtis.
Yes.
I studied piano. You were a composition major, and so our friendship continued all these years.
And I remember the first time I heard you play live at Curtis Hall was the Rachmaninoff Cello Sonata with Robert LaRue, uncut, exquisite performance. And you also played my cello concerto for Ned Rorem.
That's right. I remember that. Well, one of the things that I was excited about is to see how a composition lesson works. And so Robert LaRue and we worked up the piece, and we came to your lesson with Ned Rorem. I guess we're nervous. We're in the presence of important people. And we played, and you both smiled, and then we left. And outside we kind of went, what just happened? I mean,
Yes, we've been dismissed.
Yeah, we've been dismissed. So what happened?
Well, he was all smiles while you were there, and then as soon as you left, he ripped me to pieces.
Okay, so he was polite.
He was very.
I feel much better. Thank you.
I didn't know at the time how kind he was being by waiting. He didn't want me to look bad in front of my friends, but he was thrilled. I mean, it's an honor at any age to have fine musicians playing through your piece. And I remember I premiered the piece a few weeks later with Rob, and because you and Rob did that,
I was at that performance. Yeah,
and because of the lesson that you came to play for, I made changes to the piece prior to the premiere, of course, the way that a student does. And Rob was kind enough to learn all those changes in when we were all probably 17, 18.
I did not know that. So
yes.
So he relearned some things for the performance.
He was amazing.
Yeah.
And I remember he played it from memory at the
Yes, I remember that.
We were amazing back then.
Well, since then, your catalog of your work is amazing. You've done so much work, and you have been commissioned by important orchestras in the United States, and New York Philharmonic, Philadelphia Orchestra, and so on. But also, I wanted to touch on something recent that you've done. And you were commissioned by the Seattle Opera to do an opera called Amelia.
Yes.
Take a moment, just give me a glimpse of the process.
Well, opera is the largest and most engrossing of musical forms. It's the Gesamtkunstwerk, of course. Uses every kind of music, and that's why I love it the best. I love voices. I love drama. So I've written 6 operas, and Amelia is my 6th. It's a long process. It took 5 years between when I was first contacted by the company and then chose my librettist, and then we agreed upon the stage director, Stephen Wadsworth, and then it took a year to write the libretto, and I oversaw the writing of the libretto, and then it took another year to compose, then it was workshopped, and then another year to orchestrate it and make the changes based on the workshop, and then we had to wait 7 months to go into production, and then there's 3.5 months of production, long production period for this company because it was a really lovely, huge production. And then it all happens in about 4.5 weeks. It's like going to sea. You leave your families, and there are those magnificent world-class singers they're all like fighter pilots. They all have to keep themselves together. They can't lose themselves to the drama. And here I've got 5 years of heart and soul and everything poured into this document. I know these characters. They are getting to know these characters. They all came with their roles memorized, which of course I should have assumed would happen, but I was stunned and grateful nevertheless. And they went through rehearsals and wept through the first staging rehearsals because it's a very moving story. And little by little, over the course of several weeks, they learned how not to weep, and they learned how to be. And I remember Nathan Gunn, one of my stars, came up to me after a rehearsal and he said, "Now I'm not going to weep anymore. Now I have to take it back from brilliant to good so that I can sing it in front of an audience." So I learned a lot. So that
That's
process,
wonderful.
then at the end of it, you've got 5 weeks of production, and then everyone goes away.
Well, that's the truth with every production.
Yes.
You know, it's a great party, and then it's over.
Yeah.
So there's this whole management of what we do next, right?
And then we do it again.
And then we do it again, exactly. It was very well received. The reviews were wonderful.
Yes.
I did not see the score. I only heard some of the clips of the
Seattle
opera,
Opera, yeah.
of the opera, and the music, the lines, the vocal lines are soaring. I enjoyed it immensely, and there's your signature there, absolutely. Orchestration, so it was speaking to me. So I enjoyed those. So I hope that this piece is going to blossom and move on to other theaters.
It's doing well. It's a fantastic learning curve. We're at a time now, of course, where the economy is so very, very bad that unless pieces really are excellent, it burns away all of the would, could, might,
Right.
ought
Right.
from opera companies. They want to do a lot of things, but they have to stay close to those things that will fill the house. And we have to remember that major opera companies are still, just like orchestras, they're charities. About 30% on average of an opera's budget is paid for by ticket sales. So the rest comes from grants, public largesse, and donations from their donors. So even though only 30% is contingent upon the marketplace, all the funding is based on whether the economy is in good shape. So Amelia has been launched at the worst time since the Depression.
Wow.
Financially for opera companies, and nevertheless it's doing pretty well.
But it seemed like Seattle had a good run. I mean, they had 8 shows or something.
They had 8
Yeah.
shows, and
That's
of course,
substantial.
well, yes, because everybody in our business is 2 or 3 seasons ahead.
Right.
So all the money was put there before the bottom
I
fell in the
understand.
market. And so now what we're going to see in about a year, so this is 2011.
Okay.
In 2012 is when we're going to see these extraordinarily conservative seasons kick in for 3 or 4
So it's
years.
going to be much more competitive as to the quality and the kind of pieces that
Yes.
companies want.
I can say that every major big opera like Amelia is being reorchestrated by its composer for 22 players.
Okay.
I was.
How do you feel about this?
I think it's fantastic.
Good.
John Corigliano's Ghosts of Versailles has won a whole second life with the chamber version made for St. Louis Opera Theater. So Amelia, I've already begun the 22-player chamber version, and I'll be staging it myself as a director for Black Box.
Let me ask you another question and kind of be the last. I just noticed we are accompanied by the beautiful sounds of Broadway.
Yes, we're 5 floors above
We're
Broadway.
5 floors above Broadway. And it's snowing, and it's such a beautiful day, and it's so wonderful to reminisce with my friend.
Nice.
Let me ask you, now that the work has been completed, performed, and well reviewed and appreciated, reflect for a moment. Not just on your experience, because we've already kind of touched on it, but now that time elapsed a little bit, just looking back and seeing your creation receiving that type of treatment.
Well, that's a very difficult question because it's the most personal question I think that you can ask a composer who completely commits everything that they are to their work. Before I answer the question, I think I have to define my terms. Many composers find it unseemly even to discuss the idea that they could be so emotionally involved and invested in their piece that they should have a personal journey associated with their piece. By that I mean, look at someone like Stravinsky. Stravinsky would have said, "It's a piece of music, I've moved on. I'm an inventor. Whatever I had to say, I said in the piece. This is all just sentimentalizing." However, I am very sentimental and emotionally attached to my pieces, and so I respect the other way. The reason I needed to say that is because I have profound respect for composers who don't talk about how hard it is to compose, who don't talk about the fact that after you work on something for 5 or 6 years, there is a mourning process. After I left Seattle, I found production itself profoundly difficult, emotionally, psychologically. It was as though I had been turned inside out, and people were poking me with pins for 10 hours a day. And by the time opening night came, I felt like a cat that had been stroked too much. I couldn't bear it. I felt personally aware of every person's feelings in that 4,800 seat house. I felt as though they were all feeling things, and it was time to go away. So now I think 9 months have passed since May 2010 when that particular production happened. My other operas are all receiving revivals. I'm dealing with the facts of practicalities of a large catalog. But there were about 4 months that were profoundly difficult, mourning months, where I had to let go of the piece. I had to make myself a little bit sensitive to the hardest thing that all of us as musicians have to endure, and that is critical response. Some composers say they don't read reviews. In my opinion, a real opera composer must read reviews, because opera relies very, very much on the interrelationship between the audience, the critics, the companies, and the composer. And opera composers are closer to entertainers than not. You can't write an opera that doesn't care about the audience and the critics. And like it or not, the opera world relies on critics to help itself police itself and survive. So that is uniquely painful. I'll tell it this way. I just read a new biography of George Gershwin, and in that biography there's a quotation of him writing a letter to Dubois Hayward. And you used to play for Todd Duncan's lessons, the original Porgy, when you were a student.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but that's how close we are to George Gershwin right now. I'm 1.5 steps away from George Gershwin right now. But Gershwin wrote to Dubois Hayward, his librettist, and said, they won't just be judging Porgy, they'll be judging my value as an artist. Now that is really something, because when you get a bad or even a slightly dismissive review of something into which you've poured 6 years of your life, and you've spent 35 of the 45 years of your life doing nothing but getting ready to do that, that is very difficult. That is making yourself professionally sensitive to criticism, and that's really hard. So that there were a couple of months where I had to be open to that dialogue with those critics and with those company directors around the country who would telephone me and say, but you know, the second act drags a little bit. I love this show. Would you be open to making changes and things like that? And, you know, it's perfect the way that it is, right. But it's not perfect. It's theater. So all of these things are very hard to accept. You have to accept that your child is not perfect, and that your child may have a weak scene here or there, or there may be something about it that is perfect and something that's not perfect. So then more time goes by, and now by contract I have to go back in and put the edits in from Seattle that I made, and music staff gave me edits, and that's going to take 3 weeks. So ironically, today I jump into making edits to Amelia after not thinking about it for 9 months, while I'm orchestrating my next opera for Sarasota Opera. So it's that, in a way, is the healing. Putting the edits in, I'm just a professional taking care of one of those pieces. That's a long answer.
No, but it's a good answer. I have another friend by the name of Mr. Tchaikovsky, who was very very deeply and emotionally attached to his characters. And
Oh,
so it's
Hagen,
very
oh.
interesting to.
Onegin.
Yeah.
Oh my.
Yeah, well, but practically every character, I think one profound statement that he made, really he needed to be that way, or he couldn't write.
I agree. The characters, I must love them all, especially the bad guys. Because if that's my doorway in. I need to empathize, and I need to write the music that they tell me to write. And if I don't like them, they won't tell me to write authentic music. That is my personal way through to authenticity for the character's music. Otherwise you are a composer who is open to the criticism that many composers who don't write theater make of theater composers, and that is that we're writing about emotions rather than writing the emotions. True opera composer writes through the character the emotions. It's never about. A second-rate opera composer creates a situation, and see, the nice thing is, even if you write bad music for an opera, the lights are so great, and the sets are so great, and the singers are so great, and everybody's all dressed up, and it's a party, and this and that and the other thing. That just makes it more stressful, because then you really have to write good music, because otherwise you're just the background music for the party.
Well, very interesting points, but I think that your first point is my favorite, so I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at
Well,
that.
see, but there are so many things that we talked about. I remember when we were both students, you were coaching. What was it? It was Tchaikovsky for not Philadelphia Opera Theater, but the Philadelphia
Opera Company, yeah, OCP, I think. Yeah.
Yes, and it was, and Laura was
Right.
was learning role.
Yeah, it was Daron Hagen. You're
Yeah.
right. You're right. She did the cover. Right.
And I remember you sitting there with the Cyrillic, and just being dazzled by your ability to coach that show, not let alone play it. I mean, it's got to be one of the hardest piano reductions
I have to
ever.
tell you, the Tchaikovsky I can never get used to. I think I break it in, and then I come back in a few months, and it's all over again.
Uh-huh.
It's so orchestral.
Uh-huh.
That's what even his piano pieces are orchestral. They're not really very pianistic. They're orchestral. I can hear instruments. I can hear the orchestra.
Well, that's very moving to hear, because I never was able, because I admired Ford Lallerstedt so much,
Uh-huh.
and he terrified me. I remember my score reading sessions with him where I was just terrible, and it wasn't until
Well, welcome to the club.
yeah, well, good, thank you. See, now he said it too. 5 or 6 years later, I was living in France, in Cassis, and I had the pleasure of having a composer studio on the Med with all of the Richard Strauss vocal scores. And I made myself a project that every day I was going to, for 3 hours, read through at the piano these vocal scores, because by God, I was going to learn how to fake opera scores. And over the course of about 4 months that fall, I did. And I learned, at least with Strauss, once you knew the key you were in, it didn't matter. The added chord tones, your thumbs and second fingers, all of the fun stuff was down there.
So what you're saying, if you do it every day, you'll learn the craft.
Yes, and Ford Lallerstedt isn't there looking at you,
I know.
judging you.
Darren, it is so good to see you.
Oh,
I
what a
thank you for
treat.
welcoming me into your house
Too brief.
with the accompaniment of Broadway, and it's New York, folks.
And hopefully Mayor Bloomberg will get the streets
Cleaned up
quicker this time.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gina.